Okay, very good evening to you, Professor Varghese, and all of you who have joined us this evening. I'll just start with a brief introduction to Professor Varghese, one of the most accomplished educationists of our times. Professor Varghese was Vice Chancellor of the National University of Educational Planning and Administration in Delhi, and now is also distinguished visiting faculty at the Ashank Desai Center for Policy Studies at IIT Bombay. He holds a doctoral degree in economics with specialization in educational planning. He was the founding director of the Center for Policy Research in Higher Education, CPRHE, in what is also known as NIPA, National Institute of Education Planning and Administration, New Delhi from 2013 to 19. He was head of governance and management in education at the International Institute for Educational Planning, IIEP, a UNESCO organization located in Paris, from 2006 to 2013. Head of its training and education programs at IIP Paris from 2001 to 6, and head of higher education and specialized training over there from 1999 to 2001. He was responsible for designing and introducing the IIEP Master's Program in Education Planning and Management. While at IIEP, he was the Secretary General and responsible for the Secretariat of the International Working Group on Education, which is a network of funding agencies in education. He was also responsible for managing an Asian regional network, the Asian Network of Training and Research Institutions in Education Planning, ANTRIEP, and was editor of his newsletter. He has been, as you have just heard, also been member of several international boards, committees, and editorial boards of journals. He's also the chief editor of the prestigious Journal for Education Planning and Administration. He has directed several national and international research projects carried out in various parts of the world, Africa, Asia, Latin America, etc. He's published more than 30 books, tons of research papers, and the volumes he has put together on the Indian Higher Education Report, along with his co-editing these volumes along with his collaborators, have been really like a gold standard of research in education in India. It's a real pleasure to have you with us this evening. So could I invite you, Professor Varghese, to talk to us about skill development today? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Saikia, for such a long introduction. It is always a pleasure to interact with you, and I am really happy to be here and share some of the ideas and views on education and skill development. And thank you very much once again for inviting me. I think, friends, what I'll try to do is that the basic issue in skill development is that where do we place skill in the process of educational development? There are three ways in which skill development takes place. I will come to the details at a later stage. One is that some people argue that it should be part of the regular education stream. Some people argue that it should be a separate stream. Some people argue that this should be part of the on-the-job training, and the responsibility of training and skill development should be taken up by the employers, not by the employees or the students. This is the three major strands or three major positions in terms of the skill development that is taking place. But what is also equally important is the fact that the skill development that is taking place is also the informal skill formation and skill development that is taking place in a big way in countries like India or any of the less developed countries. That is also equally important. So that will be the nature of my presentation, and we'll come to a type of framework. How can we look at the skill development in the future of skill development in India? And I'll end with that. That will be the nature of my presentation. First, to start with, there is a positive association between investment in training, increase in productivity, and an increase in national income. Or in other words, what I mean to suggest is that if you go back to the traditional human capital theory of the 1960s, it very clearly argues that education enhances skill, and skills improves the productivity of individuals, and the productivity improvement contributes to increase in national income and also to the personal income of the individuals. Or in other words, individual earnings are improved with higher levels of education and higher levels of skills. At that point of time, initially, there was not much distinction made between education and skills. because those who are educated are considered to be skilled people. But that situation has changed. And today you find that there's a lot of challenges that are coming up in terms of the skill. The problem is that jobless growth and rising youth unemployment. So this was not the situation that you're talking about the 1960s and 70s or 1950s. But today, the problem is that the jobless growth and rising youth unemployment. It is estimated that in the 1970s and 80s, the rate of growth of employment was at least half of the rate of growth of the economy, because the economy used to grow at a rate of 4.5 to 5%. And the employment used to grow at a rate of 2.5 to 3%. This used to be the pattern. But from the beginning of this century onwards, people started talking about jobless growth. The economy is growing, national income is growing, but unfortunately, employment is not growing. So that is called a jobless growth. In the recent past, people are also talking about not only jobless growth, job loss growth. And if you see in this century itself, between 2004 to 2014 or 15, you find that the employment growth was much higher than the employment growth from 2014-15 to 2022-23 period. So there is a difference of around 3 to 3.5 million jobs growth that has taken place during the past 2 decades. So you find that there is a slowing down of the employment growth, and perhaps today we have a situation of very high rate of unemployment. Unfortunately, the rate of unemployment is also very high at the level of the educated people. Or in other words, educated people are more unemployed today than less educated people. In other words, previously, the educational level and the rate of unemployment used to take what is called as a inverted U-shaped curve. Inverted U-shaped curve. And the peak used to be around higher secondary students. So which meant that if you are at the primary level, unemployment rate is less. But if you are at the secondary level, unemployment rate is more. And if you are at the higher secondary level, unemployment rate is the highest. Then you will find a decline in unemployment rate when you go to the first university degree or the second university degree, that is master's, etc. This used to be the pattern that you find normally in the context of unemployment rate and education. But this trend has changed in the recent past. There is no inverted U shape. Even at the higher levels of education, higher levels of unemployment rate are witnessed. In other words, going to education is no longer a guarantee to get an employment. So that is something which is changing the nature of discourse. The second, this is high unemployment and jobless growth contributing to increasing the level of unemployment. So that is something which is very important. The second one, important part is that widening skill mismatches, which means that even when jobs are available, the graduates from the universities or from the higher education institutions are not in a position to get the jobs because the skills that they have are totally inadequate. So you'll find that there is a change that is taking place. The skill mismatches that we are talking about, so that is very important to understand that. So we have a problem, higher levels of unemployment, and jobless growth contributed to higher levels of unemployment. But even when unemployment is high, the youth available for work are not having the skills to employ them. So job positions remain vacant. Unemployment is simultaneously existing. You see the situation. Unemployment is existing. So the job people who are looking for jobs are increasing in number. And the job positions are lying vacant because the skills that are produced by the system are totally inadequate to employ these people in the employment market. This is a situation that you find that, and job positions remain unfilled for positive skilled people. The emergence of new jobs, an additional factor globally, is that the emergence of new jobs will require enrichment of the skill of the employed. Even those people who are employed today, because of the technology changes and many other changes, what is happening is that their skills are becoming obsolete. Unless the skill improvement programs are introduced, they will not be able to cope with the changes. During the COVID period, even in the education sector, we found that the skills which are required during the normal circumstances for teaching learning purposes and administrative purposes were different from the skills that were required to look into the context of the changing scenario of educational processes as a result of the COVID situation, So online learning, moving to the online learning, online administration, everything online was not an easy task for majority of the teachers and a large number of students. It is not only a question of not having the infrastructure facilities or computers and other things, but also having the competencies to deal essentially with these factors. This becomes very important. So the challenge is that institutional arrangements for training are inadequate. The training provided is inadequate. Institutional arrangements for providing training are inadequate, and the skills demand is increasing. This is a scenario of the skill position in the job market, which is very important to understand what are the changes that can be taken. So let me repeat what I mentioned once again. One of the important dimension is that the importance of skill in development. What is mentioned is that it is the skills are the new global currency of the 21st century. But unfortunately, the skills that are produced or provided by the educational system are totally inadequate for the students to get jobs. So there is a situation of jobless growth, high unemployment rate among the university graduates, and also skill mismatches. And as a result of that, we have a phenomenon of unemployed youth, increasing unemployment of the youth simultaneously with unfilled positions. That means job opportunities are there, but they are not in a position to be accommodated. So this is the scenario, and therefore, how can we train or provide appropriate training and skill development that can take place among the youth in not only in India, globally is the issue. It is estimated that globally around 267 million youth are not in employment, education, and training. I think this accounts for nearly 20% of the youth. Let me just say that previously we used to talk only about unemployment, youth unemployment. But many youth who are unemployed are also perhaps students, are also not willing to work, etc. So therefore, it is what is the term that is used nowadays is that not in employment, education, and training, or in other words, in short, it is called NEET. What is the share of youth in NEET? Or what are the numbers? What is the quantity? How many youth are in NEET? Let me repeat what NEET means. Instead of using how many are unemployed, today we use a term not in employment, education, or trading. That is in short NEET. That is the extent of pressure that can be exercised. That's the extent of magnitude of those people outside the labor market and education system. So what one is finding is that nearly 20% of the youth globally are in the category of NEET. And as a result of that, countries are reorienting their education and training systems to provide job-ready graduates in the employment market. As we mentioned earlier, it is not only a question of unemployment, but also the job skill mismatches. So the world reform, educational reforms or skill development reforms in the world is addressing the issue is how to provide job-ready graduates in the employment market. So instead of seeing that skill development is entirely an educational issue, it's also seen as a production issue. It's also seen as a issue to be discussed with the employers, not only with the prospective employees. And as a result of that, many of the reforms that we are talking about in education and training are trying to see that how to link or how to provide or how to produce job-ready graduates in the employment market. But unfortunately, one difficulty that we face is that there are employment in the formal sector and there are employment in the informal sector. Globally, informal sector has a larger share in employment. Nearly 60% of the employment in the world globally are in the informal sector. But however, the developed countries, the share of formal sector is very high. But in countries like India and in most of the less developed countries, what one finds is the informal sector is substantial. Say, for example, in India, what one finds is that nearly 92% of the employment sector that you talk about are not in the formal sector. They are either informal sector employment or non-formal sector employment. Only 8 to 9% of the total employment is in the formal sector. Unfortunately, all discussions about skill formation centers around the formal sector, and very rarely reliable institutional arrangements for the development of skills or skill development for the informal sector is taking place, So this is a challenge that many of the institutions, many of the employment market in India is facing. When you're talking about the informal sector, the jobs that are available in the informal sector is large in quantity, but unfortunately, the training systems or the educational systems we are talking about very rarely address these issues, So the employment normally, the qualification in the formal sector, what one finds is that a qualification inflation that is taking place. You know that, if you advertise for a post, if there are 100 clerical posts, and if an advertisement is made, you will find that there may be 10 lakh applications. Many of the public sector institutions nowadays are hesitating to make a job advertisement, because if the job advertisement is made and 10,000 or 20,000 applications are coming, then the institution does not know how to facilitate the recruitment processes. And the classic case of Uttar Pradesh, you might have read in the newspaper that even for the peon's post, people with doctorate degrees have been applying. And as a result of that, it becomes, even for limited number of selected positions, the number of applicants are too many and recruitment becomes very, very difficult. So this is what is called as a qualification inflation process that is taking place in the market, in the job market or in the employment market. This is a phenomenon that we find very lively. It is very live in the employment market. So this is something which is very important. Employer strategies to overcome the skill scarcity are skill development programs within the organization or hiring employees with the required skills. These are the two strategies adopted by employers when it comes to the question. The difficulty is that skill development programs within the institutions or within the organization implies that the employer has to invest for the skill development of their employees, which many employers are not ready to do. Employers want a finished product from the market to be recruited. So the other alternative is a recruit. But the question is that whether these institutions, training institutions and educational institutions are producing the graduates with the required skills which are demanded by the employers. So public policy response was to promote vocational education. That is how the issue of vocational education and skill development becomes important. Why? Because vocational education, though when you come to higher education, only a small group of people will be coming for higher education. But a larger number of students will be coming for secondary education, higher secondary education, and they are also crossing the limit of the in the child labor stage. So that is the stage where we talk about the skill development process that is taking place. So we talk about vocationalization of education, and vocationalization of education is mostly at the secondary and higher secondary levels of education. That is the way that we find. But one trend that we find in the skill development through vocationalization or vocational education is that vocational enrollment in the vocational uh, traditionally, if you see the enrollment in the vocational courses and streams have been high in the developed countries like Germany, like Switzerland, like Japan, like Korea, etc., and less in the less developed countries. Although unemployment is very high in the less developed countries, and skill development is an important area. Unfortunately, enrollment to skill development courses and study programs, the enrollment to these programs is rather low and slow to pick up. So this is one of the major concerns that we have. Although we talk about unemployment of the educated, but people are not ready to take up those courses and study programs where skill orientation is the major concern. And what you find is that globally enrollments in vocational and study programs have been declining. And it is estimated that the share of secondary students attending vocational programs declined from 17% of the total enrollment to 11% of the total enrollment if you take the past 50 years, from 1970 or 72 onwards to 2020 or 22. This is the change. So the point is that although skill development is an important area, institutional arrangement for skill development is considered to be the vocational education that is provided through the schools. What we find is that many a time or systematically over a period of time, there is a decline in the enrollment for skill formation. There is enrollment for vocational educational courses. And what you find also is that uh, the rising unemployment among the youth and the low returns to vocational education, empirical studies have shown that the returns to vocational education has declined. And these two are the important factors for declining enrollment in the vocational education. So this is the real problem, is that, people do not want to go to vocational education because the returns are small, the cost is high, and you find that there is a rising unemployment among the vocational education graduates. So if you look at the skill development problem now, you see that in the initial stages, we said that the rising unemployment and skill job or job skill mismatches are the major issues. But now the problem is that even when skill development programs are offered, in many countries, students are not ready to take up these courses and these study programs. And as a result of that, it acts as a constraint. One of the important, apart from the low returns that the vocational education graduate gets, another one is a question of perception. There is a perception that study means going for academic studies. If you are going for vocational education and skill-oriented programs, you are considered to be not fit for academic studies. Or in other words, those who are good in academics, those who are good in studies will go for academic oriented programs, and those who are not good will be going for the vocational education and skill development programs, which means indirectly that if you say that I am an occasionally trained person, the general perception or the impression that you create in the labor market is that you are not a bright student, you are not a good student. This has implications for people choosing or not choosing what you find as the vocational streams. So essentially, this is the real dilemma, both at the household level and also what you find not only at the household level, but also at the public level and policy level. You want to improve the situation by inculcating skills, and institutional arrangements are created for skill development through vocational education, but people are not ready to take up these positions and change this. Now let us look for a moment on how the modes of skill formation changed over a period of time, and how did it come to a situation when we are talking about the skill development and vocational training in the present context. You'll find that traditionally in all societies, we are talking of thousands of years, what you find is that there is no institutional arrangement for skill formation. Skills were transferred from father to son or father to daughter, or one generation to the other generation within the households. So that used to be the informal training of the skill development. It was a family tradition. In other words, if I can use the term, the skill development was a part of the family tradition in the traditional societies, and it extended from one generation to the other. The apprenticeship programs were started at a later stage when companies got organized, and when you find that these production sectors became a separate entities, and you got an opportunity to work or train under an experienced person. But it is not a theoretical training. It was a practice orientation that was tried to provide it. So you work with, automobile industry is a very good example. There are many people who will be working in the automobile industry and who are very well trained to repair a car or a truck or a motorcycle or a scooter, etc. But they do not know the theory, but they know only the practice. The theory will be known to those people who are educated. But this is not the case. If you are talking about an automobile engineer who is actually trained and also educated, they will be able to provide an explanation for why some of the defects are taking place, drawbacks are taking place, and where the vehicle gets struck and why they are getting struck. Others will be able to repair, but they will not be able to provide an explanation for these changes. So apprenticeship programs became the second stage in the skill development, moving from family tradition to more organized way. But it is what one finds is that the industrial revolution made dramatic change in terms of the skill development and skill development orientation in the world. Why? It is in the 18th and 19th century. What one found was that with the mechanization process and with the mechanization process that took place, the demand for skills were of a different variety. If the machines have to work, you have to operate the machines. You need those people who are capable of operating these machines. So the skills required are very different, and that too in a large quantity. Because industrial revolution, one of the positive effects of industrial revolution was what we find is the mass production, and it is more technology oriented, not technology in the sense of in the sense in which we understand now, but technology with mechanic the manual labor to a large extent is replaced by the mechanical labor, and therefore there is a big change that took place. That was the time people started, or countries started, talking about an institutional arrangement for skill development, and that is how the training system started throughout the world in many countries. And these trainings starting from England, UK, United Kingdom to other countries. At this point of time, the training that took place, the training institutions, so educational institutions at this stage were considered to be the institutions to train people for industrial development, train people to own and operate and manage machines. So the technical skills that were given emphasis, and that was the way training programs were organized. And that is how the skill development process became institutionalized, and it became one of the important areas. The technical schools, what you also find is that technical schools were very important in the process, and the technical schools became very established in many countries. And you find that these were the training ground for the emerging workforce. The initial days, most of the technical schools were offering programs in engineering related areas, but not degree programs. Training, engineering related areas, mechanics and manufacturing. That means the pressure was to find people with the skills who can be employed in the manufacturing sector. And how do we get people trained in the manufacturing sector? Most of the jobs require technical skills. So therefore, as part of the industrial revolution or as a consequence of the industrial revolution, when mass production became an important defining factor in the development process, one finds that the institutional arrangement, the schools, and not universities, the schools were the training institutions were created to impart skill development training to the people so that they can be directly employed in the industrial sector. They can be directly employed in the manufacturing sector, more specifically the manufacturing sector. So in other words, the demand for vocational education and skill development, even in the 20th century or end of 19th century, was coming basically from the employers and basically coming from those the factory owners and those who are engaged in manufacturing work. That used to be the pattern. And one of the reasons for this demand, emerging demand or expanding demand, was also the fact that most of the workers came from rural areas or migrant laborers from other countries or from other regions, the rural areas or those who came from other countries. And in both cases, the migrant laborer, either from the same country or from other country, had one common feature because they are almost untrained for the tasks which they are supposed to perform. In some cases, the language was also one of the major constraints, especially if the migrant happened to be from other countries. So that was the arrangements. Since these are mostly technical jobs, their training, language did not matter because they need not have to articulate anything. They need not have to prepare any reports. So therefore, little bit of language competency to understand, to express themselves and to understand while others are explaining some of the things, that was needed. And most of them were working under supervisors who are trained in the factories, who are the supervisors in the factories on the job. So they were the people who are providing training. They were also not theoretically sound people, but they were very good in the practice, in the practical dimensions of training. So the demand for mass skills warranted an institutionalization, and that became an important area or an important priority area for investment in education by the public sector and also by the private sector. And as a result of that, you find that the issue of skill development got transferred to from the specialized institutions outside the educational system to the educational systems and to the schools. And you find that in many a time, vocational education became a common demand, not only in less developed countries and in the developed countries, but globally. Because if you look at this century, you find a lot of mobility of skilled people from less developed countries to the developed countries. And that needed that the educational system and the training systems in the less developed countries needs to be up to the mark to keep a standard, a level of quality that needs to be maintained. Therefore, certification became one of the important characteristics of skill development in the present context. When we talk about the RPL, recognition of prior learning, and certification of that, that is very important. Why it is becoming important in the sense that is because people are moving from one sector to the other, one region to the other within the same country, and quite often from one country to the other. If you take the history of skill development or skill demand, how skill demands were met in the Gulf countries, you find that these were lower level skills. And most of the skill demand was met through migration from countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, Nepal to a limited extent. These were the 3, 4, 5 countries. You find that most of the low-level skilled jobs were provided to people from these countries. And as a result of that, you find that there was a need to reorient the skill formation or the skill development process in these countries. When one is looking for employment opportunities, that is the way one is looking at it. So, for example, if you take our ITIs, not IIT, ITIs, Indian training institutions, polytechnics, and many other training arrangements that were made in India or started in India, one will find that these were more oriented towards those areas where employment opportunities are better in India or perhaps in the Gulf countries. So you find that with the technological advancements, the skill requirements in the manufacturing sector and in the knowledge economy also underwent change. And as a result of that, the training arrangements and the skill development processes also underwent substantial changes. The common models of skill development are the models of skill development emerged are skill development as part of general education. That is what we call vocationalization of secondary education as a part of the general education. So that is one. Skill formation as a separate streams in separate institutions. That is what you find in ITIs, polytechnics, etc. They are not educational institutions or the schools or colleges or universities, but it's a separate arrangement that is being done. And skill formation through on-the-job training. That means you are recruited and you are given on-the-job training. So, for example, if you take Indian Administrative Service, IAS, once you are recruited to IAS, then suddenly you'll find that you have to go to Missouri for a year and study there. So that's a on-the-job training that is provided to those who are selected as a senior administrative officers who will be becoming senior educational administrative officers and policy makers. So there is on-the-job training. And these are the three different ways in which you find that the skill training used to take place. But there are discussions and the debates regarding these arrangements. Skill development as part of the general education. Many people opposed to that. People felt that one has to make a distinction between theoretical understanding and the general knowledge that needs to be gained, that needs to be acquired through the process. General knowledge that is to be acquired through education, and putting skill with general education will spoil that process. Sometimes it is referred to as, an academic drift, or in other words, vocationalization or skill development through general education was considered to be an academic drift that is taking place. Some of the great authors on higher education have recommended that this should not be the way that higher education is to be seen. Higher education is not a training ground, it is an educational ground. There is a distinction that is made between the knowledge that is produced and the knowledge that is to be used. Knowledge as knowing and knowledge as operationalism or operatism. That is what the distinction that is made. Universities are supposed to produce knowledge and transact knowledge as knowing, not knowledge as practical skills to be imparted. So the training institutions and the non-university sectors are supposed to develop the skill development processes that in the new sense that we talk about it, rather than combining it with the educational sector. This was the second. The second option, of course, was that you will find that the skill development as a separate institutional arrangement. You will find that this process was very common in many of the developed countries. So, for example, if you take United Kingdom, you will find that the polytechnics were developed as a separate entity and not as a university sector, but developing or imparting the skills which are required in the manufacturing sector. The IUTs, Institute Université Technology in France, you will find that this is the arrangement. And if you go to Switzerland, you will find the similar arrangements of development that is taking place. If you go to the earlier Soviet Union arrangement, you will also find that there is a separate arrangement that is taking place. And perhaps Germany is one of the best examples where you find that many of the skill development programs were through separate institutions, specialized institutions, and rather than keeping it the skill development process as part of the general education. And it's also found that it is felt that wherever there was an arrangement of putting the skill development as part of the general education, skill development did not take place in the most appropriate fashion. But at the same time, the general education standards in terms of equipping students to learn the language, mathematics, etc., declined substantially, which was not very good. So the issue came whether one should go for trained persons or trainable persons, So vocational education, there's a big argument that, vocational education fallacy argued that separation between skill training and school education. Skill training and school education. There is a need to separate this. Otherwise, the quality of general education provided in the schools will be declining. And this will have tremendous adverse impact in terms of the possibilities of picking up skills at a later stage. Some of the training institutions now report that we are not in a position to impart training systematically. And one of the reason for not in a position to impart training systematically is that the competency, the school level competency of the students, the school level competencies in language and especially in mathematics and language are very poor. And as a result of that, they are not trainable. The third model in which what you find is the skill development used to take place is on-the-job training. But in the context of on-the-job training, many a time people are not ready to, the employers, people means the employers are not ready to impart training because it means that who will be bearing the cost of training? In the first two situations, when skill development is through the schools, the employers are not paying for the skill development. When the skill development is through the specialized institutions before entering the job, a pre-service type of skill development, employers are not paying for it. Unfortunately, when the skill development is on-the-job training, then it means that the employers are to pay. This payment is based on two factors. One, the employers will be withdrawn from the production for a period of 6 months or 1 year or for the training period. That means there is a loss of production. Two, the employers will not be paying the full salary or wages to the employees who are undergoing training. And the third and important dimension is that once you get trained in specialized areas, there is no way in which the employer can keep the employee within the company or within the firm. And as a result of that, what one finds is that you get trained, you are sent abroad by the company, you go trained in one of the important specialized areas, and the medical situation, medical education, this is very important. The medical field, you'll find that some special types of medical equipments, or in the engineering departments, you'll find that some new machines, etc., are coming up. You are trained, but it's a very rare thing. But the person who got trained from the employer, they will be trying to move to other companies when they are offering a higher level salary. This will create a problem for those employers who invested. So many times you will find that you have to sign a condition that I will come back and work for 3 years or 4 years minimum, at least for 3 years or 4 years in this company. Then only I'll be permitted to go for training. This is like, once you are going for the faculty development programs in the 1980s and 90s, so it will be, or you take a PhD, leave for PhD, you are given salary. So it is mentioned that you have to not only complete your PhD and submit your thesis, but also you have to serve the same institution for at least 3 or 4 years, So there are conditionalities when you're talking about on-the-job training arrangements. There are conditionalities whereby the employers would like to see that these arrangements are carried out. These arrangements are continuing within the institutions. These arrangements are continuing to ensure that those who are trained at the cost of the employers are also contributing substantially to the increment or increase in the productivity and the profit of the corporation or the company which has sent you for training outside, So these are the 3 or 4 different ways in which training is taking place. But however, it is very important to see that everybody agrees with the fact that a very good basic education and very good school education is a non-negotiable element to promote skill development in any form at a later stage. This was not the understanding earlier. Earlier, understanding was that schools can be relied on to develop skills, and there is a drift that has taken place, academic drift that has taken place, and as a result of that, quality of secondary education perhaps declined, and it did not contribute substantially to the skills to overcome the skill job gaps that existed in the employment market. As a result of that, the general understanding today is that you should provide very good school education with skills or without skills. The schools are supposed to develop the general skills in language, in mathematics, and many other social skills that need to be developed. And the further skill development or job orientation, employment orientation, the skill development can be taking place through separate institutions or on the job by the employers. So there is no final agreement on the last part, the second part of the statement that I made, but there is a general agreement in terms of the responsibility of the schools. I'll come to the skill universities and other things at a later stage. So let me come to the next part, focusing more on changing what you mentioned about the skill formation. These are the three dimensions. Now, let me spend 2 minutes or 5 minutes on higher education. So when you're talking about the courses at the higher education level, one argument is that whether higher education should produce trainable persons or trained persons. This is the debate when you're talking about the skill inculcation process that is taking place through the higher education. So the question is that whether we should produce trained persons or trainable persons. What is the difference between the persons? Because job specific skill is an attribute that is to be developed by the employers in the employment market. However, it says that at one level, although this is the case, it says that you can produce trainables, people who can be trained easily. That is one of the qualities that they are looking for. Those who are more interested in that, there is a Nobel Prize winner called Lester Thurow, who argued that trainability should be the characteristics of higher education and not training per se. Job specific training is the responsibility of the employers. This was one position that has been taken by many of the learned professors and the learned policy makers. This is one position, but I am not saying that it should be always like that. There are changes that you find occasionally. Say, for example, we have introduced BO courses, and it is yet not clear what are the increase or improvements in the employment opportunities of these people or the graduates from the BO courses. So this is something that is very important. And when one is talking about these changes that are taking place in terms of the orientation that is to be given, it is very important that how these changes are taking place. One trend, the debate on the one hand is that if I put it little differently, on the one hand, we talk about world-class universities. On the other hand, we talk about skill universities. And this is a new change that you find in the recent past. The skill universities did not exist in this sense. Earlier, what used to exist is that the non-university sectors, which were focusing more on not on the theoretical dimensions, but on the practical dimensions of skill development. But today we have a situation whereby you find the skill universities, even in India, you find that several skill universities have come up in the past. And what is important to notice is that the private sector in the higher education sector started providing more employment-oriented courses. And as a result of that, many of the private institutions or many of the higher institutions became skill-oriented or employment-oriented courses, offering employment-oriented courses. If you go to Africa, for example, you will find that most of the private higher education institutions
Either they are faith-based institutions promoting a particular faith, or they are skill-based institutions. Many of them are rarely focused on research. Even in India, except some of the elite private institutions, private higher education institutions, you will not find many institutions imparting training will be focusing on the academic research part. Most of them are providing undergraduate studies. A large number of students are coming. The revenue generation function is much better while you provide the undergraduate studies, because for the postgraduate studies, the number of students intake, the number of students taken in and enrolled are rather limited. So therefore, it becomes easier for private sector to generate more revenue and profit on surplus and generate surplus when they are offering undergraduate classes. And to attract the students to these universities, they should give something which is different from what is being provided by the public institutions. Most of the institutions, in most of the cases, the public institutions do not provide very much employment-oriented courses, and therefore many of the private institutions are providing employment-oriented courses, skill-oriented courses, and this is one of an attraction for many students to go to these universities and these colleges in the private sector. So the private sector, in a sense, is trying to find via media whereby skill development and employment-oriented programs are one of the important dimensions for them. It is important for their existence. Why? Because unless you provide employment-oriented courses, the students will not be ready to pay money from their pocket. The households will not be willing to invest resources, the full cost resources for their education in the context of their education in the context of private institutions. Because in the public institution, there is a high level subsidy for higher education when you are following a course, when you are following a study program. But this is not the case when you talk about the private institution. So the orientation of the private institution is very different from that of the public institutions. But this does not mean that some of the private institutions are not focusing on knowledge production and research. So for example, if you take the top ranking institution, higher education institution in the country is that Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, which started as a private institution established by Tatas, not now, of course. And what you find is that, so there are many private institutions. I do not want to name any of them to make a distinction between X and Y. So what you find is that many of them are focusing enrolling students and focusing students, enrolling students at undergraduate level and trying to provide job-oriented or employment-oriented skills, employment-oriented study programs, so that they get a large number of students for enrollment. And you'll also find a large number of issues, a large amount of money, that is revenue, that is generated. But I should also try to make a distinction here. In some of the cases, if you see the 1980s and 90s, and if you see the capitation fee colleges at that point of time, especially in the engineering uh, disciplines, a large number of students were attracted. The market demanded that a large number of engineers, and you find that there was a surge in enrollment in the engineering colleges, for capitation fee colleges. People sold their land and invested heavily in terms of for the degree in the capitation fee colleges, and they got the degrees, but they found that they are very much unemployed, because the programs which they offered over a period of time were not suitable for or did not keep pace with the changes that were taking place in the employment market on the one hand. Secondly, the quality of engineering education provided by many of the capitation fee colleges were considered to be very poor. And what is happening now? If you go to Andhra Pradesh or to Telangana or to Tamil Nadu or to Pondicherry or to Karnataka and to any of these places where engineering colleges were developing, or capitation fee colleges were moving very fast and progressing very fast and expanding very fast. What you find is that many of these places, the seats live.
Sir, I have one question here.
Mhm. Yes,
Like
go ahead.
you,
Please,
um,
identify yourself.
yeah, I'm Surendra Pratap from Himachal Pradesh.
Yes, fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, so like you are saying that some of the elite institutions are providing, I mean, employment to a lot of peoples, right?
No, I did not say that elite institutions are providing employment to people. What I
Some
mean to
some
say,
of some of those, some of those.
yes.
Yeah. So means after implementing this NEP, do you think that their employment, this ratio will increase accordingly or not?
Look, ratio of between what?
Means, for example, like their placement of those students, it was earlier they already there. I means some of the institutions I can let you know as well.
No,
So,
no. No, that is not what I am saying. I am saying that in response to the market, with the
yeah,
expectation that there will be an employment expansion and explosion in unemployment, there is an explosion in enrollment took place in the engineering institutions in the capitation fee colleges.
okay,
Okay. But
yes, sir,
now what is happening is that that was in the late 80s and 90s.
right,
This was the golden period for capitation fee colleges because people were ready to give 10 lakhs rupees. At that time, it was a very high amount, as the capitation fee, not the fee.
yes, sir, yes, sir,
And used to find that this was a very nice period for them and they made a lot of profit.
yes, sir,
Then what happens is that by 2010, 11, 12, etc., that means the past decade, last decade, the previous decade, I am talking about 21st century, second decade, what one finds is that unemployment among the graduates from these institutions increased.
yes, sir,
And what was the reason for increasing? There are two factors. One, these people did not change their curriculum to suit with the job changes that took place in the employment market.
yes, sir, exactly, sir.
Therefore, these engineers were also found to be misfit, although they are skilled. Skill development has taken place, misfit in the jobs that demanded different type of skills. That is one. Secondly, in general, the quality of these engineers or education provided to these engineering institutions are considered to be very poor.
Yes, sir,
So employers were not ready to recruit them. So this came to the first point that I made when I started my lecture by saying that not only increasing unemployment, simultaneously there are also positions lying vacant. But because of the mismatch between the skill and what is required in the employment market, many of them are remaining unemployed. So remaining unemployed. And as a result of that, the next stage what is happening is that people realize that there is no point in going to the capitation fee colleges.
yes,
So
sir,
as a result of that, in Tamil Nadu, if you take many of the engineering institutions are closed down.
right, sir, right,
And in Andhra Pradesh, if you go back to history or read something, you may be already knowing, you are from Himachal.
right.
So I'm talking about Andhra. When like Himachal, this has not happened. So what you find is that
Actually, sir,
when
Andhra people used to come for to Pilani for means as far
no,
as
this is different. This is different. So Pilani people do not face unemployment in the way that a capitation fee college in Andhra Pradesh or Tamil Nadu faces, So it's a different category.
yes, sir,
That's the
yes, sir,
point that I am trying to say that. So
right,
in these cases, what happens is that there used to be a chief minister in Andhra Pradesh, YSR Reddy.
yes, sir,
He introduced a scheme called fee reimbursement scheme. Why this was introduced? Because the private colleges, engineering colleges found it very difficult to survive because the enrollment declined. And not only that, the profit declined, but also they found it very difficult to survive. At that
yes,
point
sir,
of time, they exercised their influence on the political process and went to the chief minister, and the chief minister agreed to an arrangement whereby the fee will be, anybody admitted to this engineering colleges, fee will be given by the government.
yes, sir,
And the fee rates were very high. And as a result of that, many of the private engineering institutions in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana are surviving. I am using the word surviving. Okay,
Yes, sir.
surviving because of this fee reimbursement scheme. So what we find is that there is a market process. What is the market process? When employment was expanding, there are, 5 people were running after one manager of an engineering college to get admissions, and capitation, they were ready to pay capitation fee. The households were ready to pay the capitation fee. But today, the market has changed, but the institutions did not change. And as a result of that, people are not ready to pay capitation fee. Now these managements are saying, okay, don't give me capitation fee, but give me the regular fee and please come and join.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You understand
Yes, sir. Yes,
this is
sir.
this is exactly the crux of the skill development program when it is through the educational institutions, because the educational institutions cannot change the curriculum, cannot change everything all of a sudden. It takes time.
Right, sir.
Okay. So
Yes,
this
sir.
is what has happened. And moreover, many of these private institutions, their main purpose is not education. Their main purpose is revenue generation and profit creation. They are not ready to make heavy investment again on these institutions. They want to make more profit rather than giving more emphasis to skill development and changing the curriculum and recruiting new faculty and creating new laboratories, etc. That is very much highly investment oriented. That is what you
Yes, sir.
find in these places. Is it okay, Sundar? Surinder?
Surinder, yeah. Yes, yes. Yeah. Means one thing I would like to add here, sir, that this alumni part also used to play a very important role actually.
Alumni part means what?
Alumni of that particular institution
Ah,
for providing jobs to those young minds actually, or
but
means graduates.
see what is happening. Say, for example, if you take United States,
Yes, sir.
many of the top universities, Harvard or Stanford or Cornell or any of these big universities, they have alumni who are
Yes,
working
sir.
very well, and their support helps the next generation.
Right, sir.
But you should understand that these are the people who are very well placed. They come from a different background. They are very well placed. They are in a position to support any of these things. But many of the alumni from these capitation fee colleges are not that well placed to help them. I'm not saying nobody. You understand the
Right, sir.
difference?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So that is why when I have opposed personally in the policy discussions when some people made that, alumni should be the basis for taking decisions or designing courses, etc. We take the help from that. But there is a difference. A university located, say, for example, in a relatively less developed area will be
Yes, sir.
having alumni who are also not well placed.
Yes, sir.
So we cannot rely on them. I'm not saying that you deny them or you do not listen to them. I'm not saying that. But there is a substantial difference when you talk about an alumni of an MIT or a Harvard University or a Stanford University or Oxford or a Cambridge, etc.
Yes,
They
sir.
all
Yes,
are
sir.
very well placed and they are playing influential role in policy in the country itself. Sometimes
Right,
not
sir.
in their own country, but also in our own country, you find that, if you have a degree from MIT or any other place, you have a higher position in the policy making process within the country. So they can influence, but you cannot apply the same process to an institution which is located in a resource poor area
Right, sir.
within
Right.
India. And
Yes, sir.
because they themselves are not very well placed and they cannot help, that you cannot support that system. So these are good ideas. But at
Yes,
the
sir.
same time, translating these ideas in a less developed country should be done very cautiously.
Right, sir.
Surinder, is
Thank you.
okay? Is it
Yeah, yeah.
okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
So that is the way that we want to try to see that. So now let me come back to the skill university versus world-class universities. So what is the expectation of many of these institutions? So ever since the ranking started in 2004-5 in China, then later it was shifted to UK and globally. There are 3-4 rankings. So every time ranking is an issue, it's a major issue of discussion in many cases. And you find that why India is not there in any Indian universities are not there in the 400, in the 300 or 500 top ranking institutions. Why there is no institution in the first 100 You know, these are issues that you find that. And why you find that, if you take the first 10 top ranking institutions, ranked institutions in the world, you'll find that 6 are in USA and 4 are in UK. And if you take the next 20, first 20 institutions, you'll find that 13 are in USA, 6 are in UK, and 1 is in continental Europe, you know. So you'll find that if you take Asia, the top ranking Asian institute is from Beijing, and Beijing University has the highest ranking, that is number 22. So that is the time when you find that one Asian institution is getting, and that to China after a lot of efforts, you know. So this is one. The debate is that whether you should have a world-class universities. Many of the universities you find that even the private universities, and when we started institutions of eminence, 10 in the private sector and 10 in the public institutions, what we are talking about is there is a competition that is emerging to see that who is better than the others. And you will find that there is a change that is taking place in orientation, and it is found that research, it provides a lot of weightage to get higher in the ranking, which does not go with the skill development process, which does not go with the orientation for skill development. You understand? When it is called as an academic drift. So the universities which are competing for higher scores, the universities which are looking for higher ranking, levels of ranking, both global and national, they will not invest too much in skill development process. They will develop more in research, academic interest, etc. And these academic interests are also very good for the country, for development of the country. But their major focus is not skill development. That's the point that I am trying to make. Are you clear about it? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So for example, you take the top ranking universities like Jawaharlal Nehru University, BHU, Banaras Hindu University, or you take Delhi University, or you take the state university in Calcutta, sorry, in West Bengal, you know. So, or you take many of these universities which are top ranking according to the Indian ranking. Again, you will find that their focus is not on skill development. Their focus is on academic interest. How many publications you make, which are the journals you get published, and how you improve the level and the ranking of the universities. So this debate about the ranking, so their focus, intervention, and investment is to improve their ranking. This will not go very well with the skill development agenda. The other universities which are less placed in terms of their focus on research are the universities which focus on skill development and other activities, though you have the skill universities which has come up, you know. So some people do not even like the skill universities, because universities should impart knowledge as knowing. It should focus on research, should focus on publications, whereas the skill universities, the focus is more on practicalities, you know. The professors who are run away from soiling their hands with the practical skills cannot be the people who will be focusing on research areas, you know, research ideas, etc. So that is the way one is looking at it. That is a change that is taking place nowadays. Okay, so the skill university versus the world-class universities has become one of the important dimensions, you know. So therefore, there are certain studies which try to say that we are talking about the economy, where we are talking about the knowledge economy. What are the type of skills which are required in the knowledge economy, and which are the skills which can be developed through the educational institutions? Because there are 4 types of skills or levels of skills. It may be better to use the term levels of skills are expected to be developed by the university. One is higher level skills, which are theoretical knowledge for design purposes, which is very important in the production. Design, high level skills, the highest levels of skills for design purposes. Then technological knowledge to develop production, directly contributing to production. And then you find that it is a technical knowledge for production itself, an expanding system, and vocational skills to support production. These are the 4 categories of skills which are required. Among these, the first 2 category, A and B, that means high order theoretical skills to design and high order technological skills to to design not design, to develop production. These two skills cannot be developed by even by the skill universities. These two skills are coming basically from high level, top ranking higher education institutions like IITs, like IIMs, like the top ranking universities. These are the universities which are contributing to this. And this is very essential to keep our national competitiveness when compared with what is happening globally. So these are also skills, but these are also of a very different nature. Where the skill development that can take place is the technical knowledge for production and vocational skills to support production. These are the two areas where universities, higher education institutions, or the higher secondary institutions can play an important role in terms of the skill development that takes place. It is important to note that which are the areas or what are the type of skills that can be developed in these type of institutions. Now, if you look at the skill development processes that are in India, I'll not spend much time on that. The World Economic Forum in 2023 estimated that investment in skilling of the youth in India could potentially produce or increase Indian economy by 570 billion by 2030, which means that investing in skill will be a very highly rewarding exercise. Financially investing will be a very, very highly rewarding exercise. So one is promoting that. However, the unemployment of the educated in the recent past and also of the vocationally educated in the recent past there is a challenge that is taking place. We should be more clear about what is to be done and what type of skills are to be trained and what is the quality of the training. So for example, in India, 85% of the youth are not given any formal training through the informal institutions or formal institutions, are not received any formal training. So there is immense scope. That is where the national policy recommended for integration of general academic and vocational courses. That is what the new education policy is talking about. The new education policy envisages that 50% of the students enrolled in the higher secondary education will be trained. So the new policy is not talking about a separation of training and education. It is trying to see that how skills can be integrated within the educational sector, within the educational training that is taking, educational process that is taking place. That is the important issue. So this is instead of having occasional education and occasional education separate from the schools, this new policy asks for a general education, and integrating skill development as part of the education should be an important dimension. And there are many commissions that were set up in India, and many of them argued, starting from the Surgeon Committee to the Mudaliar Committee to Kothari Commission to National Policy of Education 1968. In all these things, you find that there was an argument for development of vocational education. In fact, in 1976, the NCRT brought out or produced or developed a document for curriculum for curriculum for vocational education in 1976, And also, if you remember, some of the, socially useful productive work that is to be added, work experience programs are to be introduced. So you find that these type of changes have been taking place in most of the cases, and there was initiatives. And if you see this century, these were the past developments of different committees, starting from the Surgeon Committee to Kothari Commission to Mudaliar Committee and all other things. But if you see in the recent past, what is happening is that the skill development initiatives in India, if you see that the first national skill development policy was founded in 2019, and there was another skill development policy which was elaborated in 2015. And it is also it is felt that it put an ambitious target of 500 million youth in India will be trained by 2022. These are very ambitious targets, very romantic idea, but it did not have any basis to progress further. And as a result of that, you find that we are not anywhere close to, anywhere near to the target that we have put in this case. The Ministry of Skill Development was established in 2014 in India. And as you know that today, the Minister of Education, Dharmendra Pradhan, is also Minister of Education, dealing with the school to higher education. He is also the Minister of Skill Development. This is one rare example of linking education with the skill development at the ministerial level, that is taking place. So what you find is that this is, you cannot have a better integration than having the same Minister for Skill Development and also the same Minister for Education. So there is an effort that is meant, there is an effort that is being made, to see that there is a linkage that is taking place between education and skill development. The policy recommended that 25% of the schools and colleges offer vocational education courses. So this is a policy. And NEP 2020 recommended for integrating vocational and entrepreneurial education into the formal education and puts a target of 50% of all the learners receive vocational education by the year 2025, This is the expectation that you find, And you'll find that there is a lot of initiatives that are made by the Ministry of Skill Development and Education. And you'll find that, this is Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana is one of the important dimensions. National Skill Development Fund is created. So quite a lot of efforts are being made. And also what is important is that National Skill Qualification Framework was also developed in 2013 to ensure that the skills developed are of comparable nature, can be certified, and it is really reflects the demands, the requirements, and the production sectors. This is one of the important dimensions that you find. And therefore you will find that these changes are changes which are going to guide us. I have 5 more minutes, so let me just say that the challenges of skill development in India are how to expand public sector collaboration with the industry and the private sector. Or in other words, even today, the higher education institutions and the universities work in isolation, work in silos, not in integrated manner, not in its linkages with the private, with the industrial manufacturing sector. How to establish this? There are quite a lot of projects in India linking education and industry education linkages, but this has not come as a come to a realistic picture whereby the curriculum has been changed, the training modes have changed, and the ways in which the things are changing. Now, also in the skill development, how do we create pathways for international mobility has become an important dimension. This is very important when you are talking about the migration to the Gulf countries and the less developed countries, So it is very important which skills are to be developed. Addressing women's low participation in the labor force, that is a separate issue. I will not spend much time. And it is important that how the framework, what is the framework for the future? I feel that the future of education and skill development, especially higher education and skill development, will be that it will not be possible the universities and higher education institutions to be turned into vocational education institutions or training institutions. Yes, there are certain generic skills that can be developed. But what is more important is that I feel that there is scope for developing a non-university sector in India, in the tertiary education level, at the higher education level, but not the university sector, non-university sector, which will be focusing on skill-oriented programs, which will study programs, which will also provide theoretical orientation and also practical experience. But they may not be the research institutions or research universities or research institutions promoting publications and knowledge production. They'll be more focusing on production of goods and materials and knowledge-based production rather than knowledge production per se. So that will be a second category of change that you'll find. And thirdly, what is also equally important is that while one is going for a long-term degree of 3 years, now it will be after NEP, it will be 4 years, one has also to see that how the micro credentialing becomes important. So you find that most of the students and many students who are interested to get a job, etc., they are also trying to have small 2 months, 3 months courses and adding credentials, micro credentials on specified areas of specialization in the skill formation. Or in other words, what I am suggesting, what I am proposing is that in the future of higher education and skill development look like us in the following. Firstly, the university degrees will be longer, which will be 4 years rather than 3 years, what used to be earlier. Two, these degrees are necessary, but they may not fetch you a job in the labor market. So there you find that the students may make a choice between a university education or a education or higher education in a non-university sector. That is one part. Two, even when the students are pursuing a long-term degree in the university, students will be going for micro-credentialing, a large number of micro-credentialing in different areas. Or in other words, today, a graduate who is joining for, say, for example, BSc psychology or BA psychology or economics or mathematics, etc., come out with a degree in BSc mathematics. But after 2 or 3 years or 4 or 5 years, even now already, you find that a person who has enrolled in a long-term degree of 3 or 4 years will be coming out with one degree, university degree in a selected subject area and a large number of micro credentials in several areas of specialization, which will be short duration courses, micro credentialing, that will be more employment oriented. So that will be the nature of change and the skill development that will take place in the coming years. That is the future framework for skill development in India. Thank you very much. So I guess I'm ready for any questions if anybody has anything. Is it
Thank
okay?
you.
Or
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Varghese, for a very insightful talk. Thanks a lot. There is one question in the chat right now, which says, in NEP skill development is one trust area in BSc level. In a college, there may not be skilled faculty. In this regard, what is your opinion and suggestion?
this will happen exactly the same thing that happened with vocational education. In vocational education, one of the reasons why vocational education is not picking up is that the quality of instruction that is provided is very poor. There are no teachers who can teach in an occasion, because the teachers who are teaching are generally those people who are teaching in other subject areas. They do not have any practical experience and they cannot impart practical training and skills to the students. So unless we invest and train the teachers, put good teachers, and also establish a linkage with the industry, whereby we also draw people from the industry to teach in the universities, in these courses, when it comes to these courses, we will not be able to provide practical oriented courses. That is a necessary condition for that. So unfortunately, what is happening is that institutions belong to the government and the companies belong to the private sector. So they may not go together. Even in the private sector, an institution may be belonging to one group of people and the industries may be belonging, or company may be belonging to another set of people. In the socialist era, the advantage was that both the educational institutions and the production sectors belong to the state. So the state could take a decision and they could implement in both the sectors, employment sector, production sector, and the education sector. But that is not possible now. Anything else?
Professor Varghese, in this context, are there surveys of the quality of skill education that is being imparted in the country?
Quality is very poor in most cases. So you find, say, for example, you take ITI. Previously, ITI graduates and polytechnic graduates were high in demand. Then they were limited in number. Most of them were government institution. Then what happens is that the private sector found that it's a lucrative arrangement to generate revenue. a large number of private sector initiatives came and they expanded this sector like anything.
Hmm.
And certainly what is happening is that they are not getting any employment.
Hmm.
Even when they are getting employment, they are not getting employment in the trade in which they are trained.
Hmm.
So that is a problem. So the quality is very poor.
Hmm.
See, basically, the problem in India is quality only.
Hmm.
Whether it is higher education, whether it is school education, whether it is skill training, we have all romantic ideas
Hmm.
and all ideas, but only very few institutions. When you talk about unemployment, the graduates from these top ranking institutions, whether it is IITs or IIMs or even social sciences in JNUs, etc., they face less unemployment.
Hmm.
I cannot say that no unemployment. They face less unemployment.
Hmm.
A graduate from ISER will not face unemployment. A
Hmm.
graduate from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore will not face unemployment. When you're talking about unemployment, unemployment is faced by these people who are coming from the poor quality institutions.
Hmm. Hmm.
Most of, say, 90% of the enrollment in India is at the undergraduate level.
Hmm.
Out of that, 79% is undergraduate colleges.
Hmm.
10, 11, nearly 10 to 11% is in the training non-degree
Hmm.
programs, that is expanding in India. That is why I'm talking about the non-university sector.
Hmm. Hmm.
So if you see the data for the past 15 years, it's all, whatever I talked is data-based,
Hmm.
If you talk for the last 15 years, one trend that you find is that the share of certificate courses and diploma courses have gone up.
Hmm. So Varghese, I think we have lost you.
College.
Okay,
So this,
internet was.
So that is what I was trying to elaborate when you're talking about what is the perspective. So what I was trying to provide a perspective based on an empirical reality and also try to see that how do we look to the future of skill development in India.
Yes.
It's I'm not somebody who says that you start occasional courses and you forget about the quality, Then you are just waking up the children.
Yes.
And not in a position to provide anything.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
No, basically, I feel that we should expand and improve the school education sector and we should give very good language instruction and very good mathematics instruction, very good science instruction, so that these students, when they come out of the higher secondary level or secondary level, they are in a position to read and understand, listen to something and understand, calculate something. So these are the skills which are general skills. I'm not talking about occasional skills here, these are general skills. Then only you can pick up other skills. So the education system should focus on skills to pick up skills, not to impart job specific skills. The distinction that I made is that job specific skill may be a quality of the job, on the job. And many of the teachers are not familiar with what is happening in the manufacturing sector or what is happening in any other sectors, and they are the teachers. And in many vocational education systems, the general teachers who are teaching general education are put to teach in the vocational streams,
Yeah.
So it gives a satisfaction that I have occasionalized secondary education. There are 10% of students or 15% of the students. And that is also one of the reasons parents do not want to send their children to school, to occasional courses. If you go to an occasional course, you will not get admission in higher education. So that is the way that one has to look at it. One has to look at it more holistically.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
I remember when I was auditing Tejpur University some years ago, which is a reasonably good university in terms of its location. And
It's ranking wise also Tezpur is even
it's
now
pretty
good.
good. Yeah, it's pretty good. But their BVOC courses, I mean, in spite of financial sort of attractions, there was hardly any takers at all,
That is true. That is true. No, what I mean to say is that if I use it provocative statement, education policy in India is selling something that people do not want. We talk about occasionalization, 50% occasionalization. What you talk about it? So if you see that after 1986 policy, in 1989, there was a committee that was set up, and that committee recommended that there should be at least 25% of the enrollment will be in vocational courses by 1995 and 50% later. But we did not move even to 10%. Sir, what I was trying to provide is a perspective and based on an empirical reality and linking it with the employment sector, which, you know,
Yes.
because I did not want to give an vocational education lecture, you know.
Sure.
It is not a question of changing the curriculum. It is not a question of changing this orientation, touching in one bit, you know. That is not going to resolve the problem.
Okay. Sure. Thanks very much for insight. There's just one last comment we'll take.
Uh-huh.
Surinder Pratap says again that NCERT books are assumed to be the best, used by most of the exams, but now they need to be rewritten. What is your comment? If you wish to
But
make
you
a
know,
comment on it.
no, are you talking about vocational education or are you talking about general? Yeah.
Elementary education, sir, up to 12th class.
So no, in any case, what is important is that even today NCERT books are good when compared with many others. But that doesn't mean that it needs not have to be improved. There is a regular, frequent revision that needs to take place. But today the difficulty is that any change in curriculum or revision of textbook is a political issue. And you remember from last year onwards, there is already a debate that has taken place because NCERT deleted some of the chapters, no, from the textbook. So that happened to be some people feel that this is because of the political agenda that the government is having, or that is reflected through that, you know. So there is a need to focus on that. My feeling is that a good basic primary education and a good secondary education will resolve, a good quality secondary education will resolve a part of the thing. Say, for example, in India, most of the studies, we did the first study in NEPA in 1989, 1991. We brought to the notice that the students are not learning what they are supposed to learn. Even grade 5 students cannot read grade 2 and 3 textbooks, and they cannot write the language, or they cannot calculate, etc. This ours was the first study which brought out this in 92, 93. Then during the DPP period, this was expanded, and the ASR started coming in 2004-5 after 15 years that we did the study. So ASR every year brings out this study and very clearly shows that, you know, the students are not learning. So if the students are not learning what they are supposed to learn, if the quality of education is very poor, their capacity to pick up any skill, additional skill, is very limited. So therefore, my point is that we should focus in the school education, very good school education, and then try to see that what skill development can be done and support skill development programs that is taking place both in the formal sector and in the informal sector. Is it okay, Surinder?
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Varghese. So we'll end on that note.